Alright, recently I updated my Windows server. I changed from my Windows server to a Debian server. This has several advantages, mainly being Windows is kind of a hog, resource-wise. I was hoping Debian would help with that, and as well it was a good learning experience for me. I originally installed Debian using something called unetbootin, which can create a live USB CD. Essentially, I just chose the distribution and chose Debian, and it installed it all to my USB drive. And I was able to do a net boot from it, boot it, and it would download all the files. Once that was installed, I'm going to be running this server headless, which means without a screen, and I wanted to be able to VNC into it. However, one thing I did not know about Debian is that it will not start X, which is the Windows system. It will not start that if there's no screen attached. So essentially, excuse me, I had to write a logon script, or a startup script. Actually, I found one online. There's several tutorials on it. And that would start up a VNC connection and when the server turned on. Now, unfortunately, I'm still working out the kinks to that. I'm able to open up a VNC connection and it'll pop up with a password. I can log on. However, as you can sort of see from this, there is no GNOME panel up top. I can get the desktop. I can do essentially anything I would regularly do. However, there is no panel, and there seems to be no way to get that. I'm looking into a workaround. However, I found out something I did not know, actually. I set up an SSH connection, so technically I am logged on to that right now. As you can see, what I did, actually this came pre-installed, but I did an apt-get install OpenSSH, and actually that would be apt-get install SSH, and that would install the whole thing. I already have the newest version installed. However, once you have SSH installed on that, all you need is PuTTY, is the one I use. It's actually very configurable. Alright, and for PuTTY, essentially I have a save session here. You just type in 192.168.1.100, or excuse me, the IP address of whatever you're trying. Make sure it's SSH, port 22, and if you're on a LAN, that shouldn't be a problem about port forwarding, but if you're trying to log in remotely, you might want to make sure that your router supports port forwarding and that you forward that port to the correct IP address. Next, there's something else, X11, enable X11 forwarding, which is forwarding of applications remotely. It's kind of like Citrix or Microsoft's remote apps, and essentially that will allow me to, from the SSH prompt, type in the name of a program and it will forward that over to my screen and actually display location localhost 0. And that's pretty much all you need to do for that. Next, alright, now I need to make sure that the host is configured correctly for SSH. By default, I believe it is, but let's navigate to the etc/ssh and do a directory on that. And I use nano for text editing. You can use vi or whatever you like. Nano sshd config. And X11 forwarding, make sure that is yes. display offset is 10. Usually that's not changed unless there's an actual problem with your mouse not matching the buttons, or not matching the visuals. So, and that's the important one. Essentially, that usually is enabled by default, and once that happens, what you can do is say, if I can type right, so you just go into your command prompt, type xclock, and then you will have xclock. Or you can do something more complicated like GNOME control center, hit enter, and it'll load up the control center for you, just as if you were on the actual local local desktop of the server itself. You can do stuff like GNOME session, which is essentially your whole desktop, but it doesn't. It worked a little better last time, but this time it looks like it's not going to do anything for me. Where it would load the desktop, but it would not load anything else. And that's essentially pretty simple. It doesn't take a whole lot of setup. You have X11 forwarding right from there. And there's one more thing I forgot to mention. You actually need something that can display the X Windows system. Windows cannot do that by default. That little thing is called Xming Server. Simple download and install, and you're up and running. That is definitely something essential you need, else you'll continue to get errors when you try and launch applications. Alright, so after that I want to install pretty much all the same applications that were running on my Windows machine, which, believe it or not, are either available or there are alternatives available. The first thing I wanted to do was Subsonic. This is essentially a music server that's available through a web interface, and it looks something like this. Zoom in a little bit, and you can load all your songs in here. You can subscribe to podcasts, you can do encoding, you can even do videos if you're really determined, and I don't have the bandwidth to do that, but essentially it's a neat little thing that worked very well on Windows, and so I wanted to get it installed and running on the on the Debian server. However, it was a little bit more difficult. Essentially, there is a